At the class reunion, the woman who had once abandoned Richard, his first love, returned. During a game of truth or dare, he chose truth. Someone started to make a ruckus and asked, "Richard, is the person you love here today?" He clenched the wine glass tightly and replied in a deep voice, "Yes." I didn't go to the class reunion, so the person he loved wasn't me that night. I tore up the pregnancy test report with a serious and gentle tone. I said, "Richard, let's get a divorce. Congratulations, Mary, you Ray pregnant." When I heard this news, my first instinct was to tell Richard, but after a moment of thought, I decided to give him a surprise tonight. I carefully put away the prenatal examination report and sent him a message, "Richard, come back early tonight. I have something to tell you." Soon, I received a response, "I have an engagement tonight. Don't wait for me." I slightly knitted my brows. But in the end, I said nothing. I just said, "Okay. Be careful on the way. Don't drink too much. Watch out for your stomach, okay?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied playfully. This was quite different from the solemn and cold image of the group president he showed to the public. I couldn't help but smile. And the pent-up feeling in my heart eased a bit. In the evening, worried that Richard might get drunk, I got up to make hangover soup. Just then, my phone suddenly lit up. It was a message from an unknown number. "Mary, I'm back in the country. I'm with your husband now." The message was signed by Lilith and there was a photo. Richard was slightly raising his head, his eyes fixed on a woman in the corner. His eyes filled with tenderness. My heart skipped a beat, and a blade accidentally grazed my finger. Blood dripped onto the ground. So it wasn't an engagement. It was because Lilith had come back. Richard and I were real childhood sweethearts. Our family backgrounds and social standings were well matched, but I wasn't his girlfriend. Lilith was in high school. Richard was an excellent student with a good family background and a handsome appearance. Countless girls secretly fell for him, but he only liked Lilith. Whether it was his public confession on Lilith's birthday or his all-around favoritism towards her, everyone knew about it. I secretly watched and envied in silence. However, during our freshman year in college, the Howard family suddenly faced a disaster after the head of the Howard family went bankrupt and committed suicide. Mrs. Howard also became seriously ill. At that time, everyone around Richard left, and Lilith broke up with him and went abroad. He was in a state of decadence for a long time. When I found him, he was being beaten to the ground by debt collectors. I cried and stopped those people, giving them all my money. The debt collectors, seeing my pitiful state, left with a shout in the dim alley. Only he and I were left. I carefully tried to help him up, but he pushed me away and said coldly, "I don't need your pity." Rarely, I stood firmly in his way and said word by word, "Richard, I can help you." I swear, at that time, I just simply wanted to help him, nothing else. I didn't expect any return, but he stared at me for a long time that day, and then suddenly sneered, "Do you want to keep me?" I was stunned before I could reply. He walked away without looking back, but I still helped him. I paid his tuition fees during his school days, lent him money to invest in business after graduation, helped him make a comeback, and took care of his hospitalized mother myself. His attitude towards me gradually softened. Later, he proposed to me. The ceremony was simple, but I was overjoyed. I thought I had finally melted the ice that was Richard, and that he had long forgotten Lilith. But today, when I was overjoyed because of my pregnancy, he lied to me about having an engagement and then turned around to attend the homecoming party of his first love. It was quite ridiculous. Looked out of the window and gently pushed it open. A gust of winter wind whistled by, and the warm breath I exhaled gathered and then dispersed. It couldn't be retained for even a moment. Suddenly, I felt that this winter seemed much colder than every previous year. When I stepped on the snow and stood at the door of the bar's private box, I suddenly stopped in my tracks. I didn't know why I had come. Was it to catch him cheating, or to confront him? But either way, it would be a loss of composure, and even more, a sign of being in a sorry state. Just then, a waiter pushed the door open and came out. Seeing me, he gently asked if I was lost. I shook my head. After he left, I gently pushed the door open a little, leaving a small crack. It wasn't big, but it was enough for me to clearly see the scene inside the box. The light was dim. Richard was leaning back on the sofa, his head slightly raised, his bangs messy, which made him look even more mature and unrestrained. He was quite eye-catching. Lilith was sitting not far from him, staring intently at him, but Richard didn't even glance at her. It seemed that he really didn't care about her. Lilith's eyes secretly turned red. She looked wronged and pitiful, completely different from the arrogant look when she sent me the message. On July 30th 4 years ago, Richard proposed to you, but maybe you don't know that on that day, I married someone else. Do you think Richard married you because he really liked you, or to show off to me? Or maybe just because he didn't want to owe you a favor? Although they were questions, her tone was certain. She was confident that Richard loved her no matter what, even though, at this moment, Richard seemed so indifferent to her. The people around noticed this scene. Abis Boyd smiled and asked, Richard, do you want to play Ruth or Dare? Richard neither nodded nor shook his head. The next moment, the bottle pointed at him. He glanced at it and said coldly, Truth. The man smiled, looked at Lilith, then at Richard, and asked, Richard, is the person you love here today? The box fell silent instantly. After all, everyone knew well about the past grudges between Richard and Lilith back then. Richard treated Lilith so well, but when he was down and out, Lilith left him without hesitation. If it weren't for my unwavering support and wholehearted help, Richard wouldn't have achieved the status of a new business tycoon today. It was obvious to anyone which one of us was more important and who truly cared for Richard. What's more, Richard's love for me over the years has been obvious to all. But Richard hesitated to give an answer. He neither affirmed nor denied it. I stood at the door, staring intently at him, and the heart in my chest that had been pounding violently gradually cooled down bit by bit. In the private box, someone thought Richard found the question stupid and ridiculous and disdained to answer, so he said with a smile, What kind of question is this? It's so simple. Richard doesn't even bother to pay attention to you. Mary isn't here today, so of course the person Richard loves isn't here either. Hearing this, others started chattering about the things Richard had done for me over the years. So Richard built a rose manor just for me on my birthday. I could choose from priceless jewels at banquets. He declared his sovereignty over me time and again. When he won the award for young entrepreneurs, he made vows of love to me. There were so many things that it was impossible to count them all. Someone looked at Lilith with a sneer and taunted, Lilith, you really didn't know a good person when you saw one back then. If you hadn't left, you might be Mrs. Howard now. Yeah, you must regret leaving Richard so much now. Lilith's face turned as pale as paper, and her fingers gripping the wine glass and wide. She seemed so fragile that she was on the verge of collapse. But I noticed that Richard's jaw was tightly clenched, and he was unconsciously rubbing his thumb with a hint of displeasure. This was his unconscious little gesture whenever he was facing a choice he was thinking seriously. After a moment, just as Lilith was about to flee in humiliation amidst the jeers of the crowd, Richard suddenly took a big sip of wine and said, Yes. Everyone was stunned. Someone reminded, Richard, you must be drunk. Your wife isn't here today. But Richard put down the wine glass and repeated, The person I love is here. His words were final. I wasn't there. But Lilith was, so it was obvious who Richard loved. The whole room fell silent. Lilith, however, was overjoyed. Richard, I knew you still loved me. I was right to come back to you. Richard glanced at her hand holding his cuff. A glint flashed in his eyes, but he didn't pull away. The next second, he casually averted his gaze, slightly tilted his head, and then saw me standing at the door all the time. Richard's expression froze instantly behind him. Lilith's eyes held a hint of triumph, as if saying, Look, even after I've been away for so long, Richard's cleanliness obsession still doesn't work on me. I've always been Richard's exception. Mary, don't mind what Richard said about loving me just now. Was probably because he was drunk. It was a clumsy trick, but it was disgusting enough. I slightly furrowed my brows and looked at Lilith. Lilith, as if to show off, tried to hold Richard's hand, but the next second, Richard shook off her hand and walked towards me. Mary, it's so cold outside. Why aren't you resting at home? You always think bars are noisy, don't you? His voice was gentle and his words were considerate, as if nothing had happened just now. With a faint smile, but dodged his hand reaching out to me. It is really cold today. The weather was really cold. So was my heart when we got home. The hangover soup on the table was still steaming. The wisps of steam floated into the air and then dispersed, as if it had never been there. I reached out to lift the lid of the pot, quietly filled a bowl of soup, and placed it in front of Richard. When I wanted to withdraw my hand, he grabbed it. He said, Mary, Just now he wanted to explain what he had said just now. He knew I had heard it, but after waiting for a while, I didn't hear the rest of his words. His face became stiffer and stiffer. I smiled and helped him complete the explanation. After drinking some wine, one always says the wrong things. I understand. He looked at my expression and seeing that I really didn't seem to care, he slightly furrowed his brows but still nodded. He quietly drank the soup under the dim yellow light. The sharpness of his features was softened. He was different from the high-spirited young master of the Howard family in high school, and also different from the introverted and low-key Richard in college now, after going through all kinds of hardships. He had been reborn and was dazzling, and I had been with him all along the way when Howard Group was just starting. It couldn't even pay salaries. I took out my savings of many years, gave up my favorite painting, and worked as a junior accountant, a clerk, and his most capable secretary assistant in his company. I accompanied him as he gradually developed Howard Group from a small workshop with less than 10 people to the large group with hundreds or even thousands of people it is today. It has been 10 years now. I looked at him and suddenly asked, "Richard, why did you marry me back then?" The soup spoon touched the edge of the bowl. Richard looked up at me with a gentle smile. "Because you're obedient, beautiful, and excellent." His answer was very specific and comprehensive. I nodded in agreement, and then asked again in a gentle voice, "Then, why did you like Lilith back then?" This was the first time I had mentioned Lilith seriously. Richard saw my attitude and, as if he couldn't do anything about me, let out a helpless laugh. But he got stuck. He slightly frowned, and a hint of deep thought appeared in his eyes, but he couldn't come up with an answer for a long time. I kept looking at him until my eyes felt a little sore. Then I quickly blinked and skipped the topic with a smile. "Richard, do you love me now?" he answered without hesitation. "Of course I love you." I looked at him in silence. Richard reached out and hugged me tightly, as if he wanted to merge me into his body and never be separated. "Mary, I love you. I won't say such things again in the future." I only said that to avoid embarrassing Lilith. "I know it made you sad. It's my fault." His attitude was sincere, and his words were gentle. My fingertips trembled slightly, and I nodded, but he didn't know that the heart in my chest, which had been moved by him countless times, seemed to be tired and was beating very slowly and softly, just as he didn't know when you truly love someone. You can't put your finger on the reasons, just like he couldn't say exactly what he liked about Lilith because he liked everything about her, so how could it be clearly explained? If it can be clearly stated, what kind of love is that? But I didn't want to tell him, I was just too tired. The next morning, I told Richard that I was going to my mother's place today. Place today. He said he would go with me, but when the appointed time came, Richard didn't show up. I drove back to the Habsburg family's house alone. My mother was a bit surprised to see me come by myself. "Why isn't Richard here?" I wasn't good at lying, so I said nothing. Then my mother changed the topic and started talking about other things. My parents had a business-arranged marriage, but their relationship had been as good as ever for 10 years. My mother was so spoiled that every expression on her face was filled with happiness. In contrast, I looked rather haggard. Suddenly, I remembered that many years ago, my mother had tried to stop me from being with Richard, although she soon gave in to my wishes. I used to think it was because of the mismatch in our family backgrounds, but now I thought my mother wasn't that shallow, so I asked, "Mom, why didn't you want me to be with Richard back then?" My mother looked at me for a long time as if she could see something. She said gently, "Because you two are too alike, both of you are stubborn, and neither of you will give up until you hit a dead end. Is that so?" I thought about it but had no answer. When I was leaving, my mother gently stroked my face, her eyes tinged with sadness. "Mary, no matter what decision you make, follow your heart. Don't do anything that you'll regret." But what would I regret doing? I still had no answer. When I got home, Richard wasn't back yet. I turned on my phone, and it was full of his messages of apology and explanation. I didn't reply to any of them. Then I drove to the downstairs of his company. The receptionist knew me. She was about to call him, but I stopped her. She looked at me, hesitating to speak. Just before I entered the elevator, she suddenly said, "Madam, you should keep an eye on the president." I was taken aback before I could understand the hidden meaning of her words. The elevator door closed, but soon I understood. Just as I was about to push open the door of Richard's office, I heard a familiar sobbing sound. "Richard." I really don't know what to do. I was forced to leave back then. I've never forgotten you these years. I know you love me too. Right? My movement froze. It was Lilith. She was standing in front of Richard. Wearing a pink dress, with black hair and fair skin. Her eyes were red, and she looked so pitiful and endearing while crying. But Richard didn't look at her. I'm already married. Whatever happens to you has nothing to do with me. His voice was cold, harsh, and heartless. Lilith seemed to be stabbed by his coldness. Her face turned deathly pale, and she let out a bitter laugh. I know about it, just like you. I won't break up you and Mary's relationship. She's a wealthy young lady unlike me. I have nothing now. How can I be worthy of you? But where else did I go except to you? If I go home, I'll definitely be forced to marry that old man. I might as well die. She covered her chest and cried miserably, as if she was about to faint from crying. The next second Richard just glanced at her and then lowered his head to deal with the documents. He said nothing. If it weren't for his slightly trembling fingertips or the wrinkles on the documents that he had tightly clenched, I would have believed that he was truly unmoved. But I knew him too well, so I knew that at this moment he was making a choice, choosing between marriage and Lilith. But the answer was obvious. He walked towards Lilith and hugged her in his arms under her expectant gaze. His voice was low. Bob, Lilith, don't be afraid, I'm here. No one can force you. Lilith's eyes sparkled with tears, and she wept with joy. The office, dominated by dark gray tones, seemed to be tinged with a bit of ambiguity because of their embrace. I stood outside the door, watching them hug, kiss and pour out their year-long yearnings for each other. I didn't interrupt or make a sound, not until they walked out of the office hand in hand and saw me at the same time. Richard's expression changed instantly. He opened his mouth but only managed to say a few words. Mary, how long have you been here? I looked at him and chuckled. A long time. So long that the man I had loved for so many years suddenly seemed like a stranger to me, so long that the heart that had been moved by him countless times could no longer find any trace of love. Not even a little bit. Mary, let's go home. I interrupted his explanation and repeated with a smile, Richard, let's go home. I thought it was time for me to make a choice. When we got home, neither of us said a word. The whole room was silent. I turned on the light, and the warm yellow light filled the room, falling on Richard as if coating him with a layer of light. He hung his head, his hands clasped together, silent. I suddenly remembered the day 4 years ago when he proposed to me. He seemed to be sitting opposite me just like this. He looked at me seriously and softly called out, Mary. I was stunned. He let out a gentle laugh, his eyes curved. And then he asked me seriously, will you marry me? At that moment, my mind went blank. It was not until he laughed that I came to my senses and then nodded without hesitation. I had always regarded that day as the happiest day of my life, but Lilith had shattered my dream at this moment. I looked at the man in front of me and asked softly, Richard, do you remember what you said when you proposed to me? He looked up at me, unconsciously clenching his hands. You said that when two people are together, they should never betray each other and never be separated. And when I spoke again, my voice was hoarse. But you cheated. I saw it with my own eyes. He explained eagerly, Mary, I was out of my mind just now. I really don't like Lilith. I interrupted him. But you're not reconciled, you Ray, not reconciled to not getting Lilith's love when you were young, not reconciled to your youth being in vain. So, you've never forgotten her. Even though it was me by your side these years, and it was me who helped you make a comeback. Even though Richard had continuously shown his love to me, doing one sensational thing after another in the past, I was delighted by this. That now that I think about it, Richard has always been low-key in doing things, yet he was extremely high-profile only when it came to showing his love to me. Why? Was it really because he loved me? Or was it to show off and be petty with Lilith, who was far away? I think it was the latter. Richard had never loved me. But he took advantage of me time and time again from beginning to end. I had loved the wrong person. Thinking of this, my heart felt as if it was being roasted by fire and cut by a knife, bleeding profusely, and in excruciating pain. Richard was silent for a long time. So long that I thought he wouldn't speak any more. Then he suddenly said, Mary, I really won't look for her again. Can you give me a chance? I already did. I wiped the tears from the corner of my eyes. My voice very soft. The day you said you loved Lilith. Richard's expression froze. Maybe he thought that my calm appearance that day meant I didn't care. But I did. I was really sad that day. He said he was trying to save Lilith from embarrassment, but I knew him too well. So I knew he was lying. On the same day he lied to meet Weiss for Lilith. It was quite ridiculous. To be honest, before that day, I thought my love for Richard was as solid as a rock, and no one could destroy it. But after that day, I realized I was wrong. Turns out my love was so fragile that a look or a word could easily shatter it. But I was not willing to let go. I had accompanied Richard every step of the way to get to where we are today. I had endured a lot of hardships, shed tears and sweated. Why should I just give up and let someone else have him? So, I self-righteously gave Richard a chance. I told myself that if the two of them had no contact in the future, I could pretend that nothing had happened. But I was wrong. Just as I could never let go of what Richard said that day, Richard couldn't let go of Lilith either. I always said that Richard was not reconciled to Lilith. Was NTI the same? That's why I was holding on to this false marriage and this hypocritical husband, refusing to let go. But now that I think about it, what's the point? All I got was endless self-consumption and self-harm at this moment. I suddenly admitted defeat. I had loved the wrong person, and I accepted it. Looking at the man in front of me, I took off the diamond ring on my finger, and said seriously and gently, Richard, actually, if you fell in love with someone else, whether it's Lilith, Wang Lilith, Wei Lilith, whoever it is, I can understand, but you should have been honest with me instead of lying to me again and again. I'm your wife. The one who has been with you for decades. Even if you don't love me, you should respect me. Or is it that you feel a special sense of existence by watching me being fooled by you? Richard looked at me eagerly, trying to hold my hand. Mary, no, I never meant to lie to you. I dodged. He said he never meant to lie to me, but he did. Time and time again. I was almost unable to tell what was real and what was fake. I was tired. I didn't want to bother to distinguish anymore. I looked into his eyes and said word by word, Richard, let's get a divorce. I was tired. I didn't want you anymore. As for the child, I gently stroked my still flat abdomen and let out a soft sigh. Richard agreed to the divorce because of my firm attitude that night. Richard, if you don't agree, I'll sue you. His company was about to go public. And at this crucial juncture, he wouldn't allow such a situation to happen. Even if he was extremely reluctant, he moved out of the house. And I blocked all his contact information as if this way he would disappear from my life. But every night at dawn, when I looked out of the window, I could always see his car and the sporadic sparks inside. Richard was smoking in the car. I thought he had already quit. Turns out he hadn't. He just hid it. Just like his love and unwillingness for Lilith. And I contacted my doctor. Arranged the operation for tomorrow. I didn't want this child who was no longer born into an expecting love. Beep. The operating light came on. After being injected with an anesthetic, I should have fallen asleep drowsily. But I could always hear some voices. It's a little girl. Yeah, so pitiful. It's already fully formed. I heard Mary had a miscarriage once by accident. If she has this one aborted, it might be difficult for her to get pregnant again. Yeah. An accidental miscarriage. I remember that was when Howard Group was just starting. At its most difficult time, we couldn't get any investment. And I didn't want my parents to look down on him. So I didn't seek help from the Habsburg family. There were only Richard and me in the company. We were busy with seeking investments and looking for projects. So busy that we lost track of time. So neither of us noticed that a little life had quietly come into the world until I fell down the stairs due to hypoglycemia. The child was gone. My heart was almost broken. Richard hugged me tightly and cried for the first time. He said he was sorry to me and that he would treat me well. I believed him. That day, the two of us who had lost our precious treasure held each other tightly, tried to seek warmth from each other at that moment. I really thought we would be together forever. Until Lilith came back, until now as I lay on the operating table, about to get rid of my second child with him. Liar Richard, you've deceived me so badly. You clearly never liked me. But fortunately, now, I don't like you either. Richard. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was the nurse's gentle smiling face. Mary. How are you feeling? Pretty good. I nodded. My eyes turned to the window. And I suddenly noticed that several tender buds had quietly sprouted on the tree outside. They were so delicate, seemingly fragile, yet growing tenaciously in the cold wind. So, spring was coming. That was nice. This winter, which was colder than previous years, was finally going to pass. It wasn't cold anymore. I didn't tell anyone about the miscarriage. Not even my parents. I had loved the wrong person, and I would bear all the consequences myself. Why make others sad for nothing? The lawyer I hired was well known in the industry. In less than a month, the divorce papers were presented to me. The property was divided 70-30 in my favor. The lawyer told me. Originally, I managed to get a 60-40 split, but Richard voluntarily increased your share. Maybe it was out of guilt. But I wouldn't refuse after signing my name. I finally formally looked at the man sitting opposite me. In just half a month, Richard had become shockingly haggard. Even his suit was messy, which was quite unlike his usual self. Richard. I called his name. He looked up at me, with dark circles under his eyes, looking rather pitiful. It was as if he was the one who had been betrayed, not me. Do you know what the good news was that I wanted to tell you that day? I looked back at him and smiled slightly. That day, I found out I was pregnant. I thought you should have the right to know that there was once a child belonging to both of us. I placed a ultrasound image and the prenatal examination form in front of him. One could faintly see the curled-up shadow in it. That was the child I had been looking forward to for so long. Now it was gone, killed by me with my own hands. At this moment, I belatedly felt an uncontrollable pain spreading in my chest. It was indescribable and impossible to let go. Richard. You gave up on him yourself. Richard's breath hitched, and he stared blankly at the two pieces of paper in front of him. They were light, yet felt incredibly heavy. He looked at them over and over again, his eyes showing a kind of brokenness I had never seen before. When he spoke again, his voice was extremely hoarse. Why didn't you tell me earlier? He was questioning me. It was quite ridiculous. Because I thought for a moment, and my smile gradually disappeared. Because you don't deserve it. Richard, I've been with you for so long, yet you could hurt me again and again for someone who once abandoned and hurt you. Do you really care about a child you've never met? So, stop pretending to be affectionate. You don't deserve love. Never. I turned around and left with the agreement, vaguely hearing a hoarse shout from behind. Maybe it was Richard. Maybe not. But I didn't care anymore. The news of my divorce from Richard spread quickly. The property division attracted a lot of attention. I got 70 and he got 30. Everyone said Richard was kind-hearted, and what I didn't expect was that Lilith actually took the initiative to invite me in the coffee shop. She stared at me with an unfriendly expression and started with a rebuke. Mary, don't you think you're being too greedy? I raised my eyebrows and looked at her. Richard's company is about to go public. Now that you've divorced him and taken so much of his property, how can he go public? Aren't you harming him? I took a sip of coffee and said in a flat tone. Yes, I am harming him. I knew this was a crucial period for him. And I also knew that the property he gave me was enough to disrupt all his plans. But so what? I chuckled. Should a person who betrayed and hurt me have a good ending? This was what I deserved. I admitted that I had loved the wrong person and was willing to bear the consequences. Richard had an affair during the marriage, and he should also bear the consequences. That was only fair. Lilith looked at me as if she was seeing me for the first time, her eyes wide open. Mary, you're so cruel. Anyone in this world can judge me, but you, Lilith, don't deserve to. I sized up the woman who regarded herself as Richard's wife. My smile gradually faded, leaving only a cold expression on my face. You're just a mistress trying to break up someone else's marriage. Upon hearing this, instead of feeling ashamed, Lilith gave a smug smile. Mary, you've been married to Richard for so many years, yet you couldn't hold on to his heart. Isn't it because you're useless? How can you blame me? Before she could finish, I raised my hand and slapped her across the face. Pa! The sound was clear. Lilith was stunned by the slap. Mary, you? I grabbed her chin and stared coldly into her eyes. Lilith, I don't blame you. But you also don't think you can be with Richard. I, Mary, have never been someone who can be bullied. I've never been easy to mess with. Otherwise, I wouldn't have accompanied Richard through the tough business world, fighting step by step. I restrained my temper and quietly became Richard's support. It wasn't because I was soft-tempered and easy to bully. It was just because I liked Richard Lilith thought she could hurt me through Richard, and I would be heartbroken, leave in grief, and never recover, so that she could easily take my place, but unfortunately, she always misjudged me. I, Mary, am not a weak little woman who can be defeated by love. The harm Lilith inflicted on me, I will return it to her 100 or 1,000 times over. This is the ending I've chosen for her. After Lilith returned to the country, she entered the entertainment industry. With Richard pouring resources into her, she soon gained some popularity, but during a scheduled live broadcast, a woman suddenly burst into the studio and started struggling with Lilith in public. "You bitch, I finally found you. You seduced my husband abroad. Made him divorce me. And then took all the money and came back to the country. Do you really think you're clean, that no one will know about your dirty deeds? Now you're doing the same thing again, seducing the president of Howard Group and making him divorce Lilith. Aren't you disgusting?" These few words carried a huge amount of information. Everyone was shocked. Lilith struggled wildly and roared with all her might, "Turn off the live broadcast." Only then did the studio staff react and unplug the power, but it was too late. Everyone had seen and heard everything clearly. In this era where the internet reaches every corner of the world, all the things Lilith had done abroad were dug out. Even some online influencers personally exposed the evidence in the photos. Lilith was lying on the bed, scantily clad, sexy and hot, while beside her stood a fat old man, looking at her obsessively. It was the husband of the woman who had burst into the studio, and also Lilith's sex-husband. This news caused a huge stir across the internet. Lilith was finished. Her reputation was completely ruined, and she was also going to be sued by the woman to get back the property she deserved. At this time, everyone was very concerned about Richard's attitude. Howard Group quickly clarified the ambiguous rumors with Lilith. Within half a moment, Lilith even made a scene in front of the gate of Howard Group, and it was captured on camera. Lilith rushed towards Richard crying, but was brutally thrown to the ground by the bodyguards. She looked embarrassed and pitiful. Richard didn't even glance at her and just walked straight ahead, facing the reporters' questions. His handsome face was full of coldness. "The innocent have nothing to fear. My relationship with Lilith is just that of classmates, nothing more." He was calm and noble, as if he and Lilith, who was covered in dirt on the ground, were from two different worlds. Lilith cried heartbrokenly. I watched the video coldly, my thoughts in a mess, which finally turned into a sigh. Richard had always been a businessman, cold-blooded and icy when faced with something unfavorable. He would only make a decisive sacrifice. The so-called love out of unwillingness for Lilith was nothing in the face of huge interest. Lilith had misjudged him and ended up like this, which was well-deserved. Richard's Howard Group ultimately didn't go public due to insufficient capital chain. I had expected this, but I had no time to pay attention. I officially took over from my father and became the president of Habsburg Group. From Mrs. Howard to the president of Habsburg Group. The next time I saw Richard was at a friend's baby's 100-day celebration. The friend's baby was chubby and extremely cute. I took the baby in my arms. It was soft and smelled of milk. I don't know why I thought of my two children who had met an untimely end. If they had been born, they should be about this age now. They would call me Mom sweetly in the future. Thinking of this, my heart felt like being stabbed with a knife, and the pain was unbearable at this moment. My friend patted me. "Richard is here." I looked up and saw that Richard was standing not far away, staring blankly in my direction. My friend sighed and said, "He's having a hard time. I heard Lilith is pestering him non-stop. She even secretly took photos and videos of Richard kissing her and is forcing Richard to take responsibility for her. Otherwise she'll expose his affair during the marriage." Some time ago, Richard's attempt to go public failed, and now he urgently needs investment to replenish the capital chain. He can't afford any scandals at this time. The two of them haven't reached an agreement yet. However, he deserves it. You helped him for so long and he still wasn't satisfied. The last sentence was full of schadenfreude and mockery. I slightly curled the corners of my mouth, turned around and left the hall. Walking towards the garden, Richard followed me out. "Mary, long time no see." I turned to look at him. "Richard." My tone was distant. Richard gave a bitter smile and suddenly said, "Mary, today is my birthday. Can you take a walk with me?" I was taken aback, slightly furrowed my brows and wanted to refuse, but looking at his stubborn gaze, I finally nodded. We left the banquet hall. Richard led me to a small alley. It was pitch black inside, and the wind blowing through carried a damp smell. I stopped in my tracks. Richard walked a few steps forward and said softly, "Do you remember this place?" I pursed my lips and didn't answer. I was beaten to the ground by debt collectors at that time. I even thought about killing them, but I couldn't. I could only take the beating, and then you showed up. You cried and threw yourself on me that time. I thought you were just pitying me, but it was a long time later that I realized you were feeling sorry for me. You were good to me and helped me not out of pity, but because you liked me." He gave a bitter smile, his tone tinged with a hint of melancholy. "When I realized you liked me, my first reaction was actually one of relief, because if you liked me, you would never leave me. I have lost so many things in my life, and I didn't want to lose you." I looked at him in silence, not saying a word. A small street lamp at the entrance of the alley lit up somehow. A dim light fell on Richard's face, highlighting his sharp features, but his eyes were dull. He turned back to look at me. "Once you asked me why I proposed to you in the past. I thought it was to be petty with Lilith, but after the divorce, I realized that I married you because I wanted to see you happy. I regretted it a long time ago. I should have loved you well. I shouldn't have been blinded by the unwillingness of my youth." Yes, Richard's feelings for Lilith might not have been long, just a sense of resentment, but no matter what it was, it had destroyed us. He said he regretted it, but what did regret matter? Would the harm disappear? Would the tears shed and countless nights disappear? He asked me, "Mary, can you forgive me?" I looked at his hands with veins showing as he clenched them tightly, his bangs falling messily on his forehead, his eyes pleading, as if I was his last hope. My answer determined his fate, but I looked at him and said word by word, "If I forget everything, then all that happened in the past was my fault." His expression instantly fell, and his straight back slightly hunched, as if all his strength had been drained. I turned to look at the entrance of that alley. It was bright, with red bricks neatly paved on the ground. Clean and tidy. It was no longer the dark, narrow and garbage-strewn alley of the past, just as I could no longer find even a trace of the sharp and gloomy look he had when he leaned against the wall and looked up at me in the current. Richard, and I too, would no longer cry for him unconsciously. We had both changed. This marriage, this love, was now in a complete mess. A gust of wind blew, shattering my words. I said softly, "But I don't want to pursue it anymore. No matter what happened in the past, let it go. I want to live well in the present and not be trapped by the past." I turned around and left the alley entrance. Looking up, the trees on both sides of the road had long sprouted green leaves. Street lamps lit up one by one, and the light filtered through the leaves and scattered on the ground. I walked quietly. Then, a shadow blocked my way. I looked up and saw the Richard from my youth. His eyes sparkled with tiny light. She was wearing a white shirt, with prominent collarbones, like a butterfly spreading its wings. He smiled, his eyes curved, and his voice was soft. "Mary, will you marry me?" I looked at him for a long time, then I shook my head. I heard myself say, "I won't." During the days of being married to you, I was once happy and once sad. I don't regret knowing you, but if I had another chance, I wouldn't want to marry you. It was quite tough being with you. I know that accompanying someone is a huge bet in itself. I also know that I lost this bet, so I don't want to bet anymore at this moment. A gust of wind blew, and the Richard in front of me instantly dissipated. A raindrop hit the corner of my eye, like a teardrop, but I would no longer cry for Richard, never again. Just like those years of passionate love, which had long disappeared in the passage of time after a spring rain, the chill brought by the cold winter was dispelled. I thought, the day of blooming flowers and warm spring was always going to arrive.